My name is Cyrilda Fairmont, and I'll never forget the moment my own father laughed as I was turned away from my sister's Navy promotion ceremony. The sailor at the door searched the list twice, then looked at me with pity. My name wasn't there. It wasn't a mistake. It was erased. And when my father smirked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Of course, she's not invited." The room chuckled like it was a family joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was the story of my life, erased, dismissed, invisible. That day, standing outside while the applause thundered for Astrid, I realized silence had never protected me. It had only kept me small. The sun beat down on the asphalt of Naval Base San Diego as I pulled into the crowded parking lot, row after row of polished cars glinting under the sharp light. This was the day my sister, Astrid Fairmont, would pin on Lieutenant Commander, a milestone my family would brag about for decades to come. I had dressed simply, a pale blue blouse and black slacks. No uniform, nothing that would draw attention. My plan was to slip into a back row, clap at the right moments, and stay invisible enough not to stir tension. It was supposed to be uncomplicated, maybe even forgettable. When I reached the check-in table, a young sailor with a clipboard glanced up, nerves evident in the way his pen tapped against the page. He scrolled through the list once, then again, his brow furrowing deeper before he angled the tablet toward me. My name was missing. Cyrilda Fairmont was not there. Before I could ask him to double-check, I heard a voice behind me, steady, cutting, unmistakable, my father. "Of course, she's not invited." His arms were crossed over his chest, a smirk tugging at his mouth like he'd just delivered the punchline of an old joke. A few people in line chuckled, thinking it was family banter, nothing serious. But I knew better. That smirk wasn't playful. It was dismissal, final and public. I turned toward the glass doors, inside. Astrid shone in her dress whites, her uniform perfect down to the gleam of her shoes. She smiled broadly, shaking hands, her posture radiating confidence, the golden daughter at the center of it all. My mother hovered at her side, fussing over her hair as if Astrid were still 10 years old, about to sing in a school recital. I stood on the outside looking in, the laughter from the lobby spilling faintly through the glass, a reminder that I wasn't welcome. It wasn't an oversight, not a clerical error. Someone had made sure my name was gone, and I knew exactly who had the power and the motive to erase me. Astrid. In Kansas. The backyard was our training ground. My father barked out times with a stopwatch in hand as Astrid sprinted around the yard, her ponytail snapping like a flag. He cheered her on as if she were already a naval officer. I stood off to the side, a clipboard pressed against my chest, dutifully recording her laps. That was my assignment. Observe, support, stay out of the way. The pattern repeated itself on every holiday. Astrid would parade her trophies, medals glinting under the porch lights, while neighbors and relatives erupted in applause. When I shyly presented my National Math Award one summer, my father barely spared it a glance. "That's nice," he said, voice flat. "But it's not the Navy." The room broke into polite laughter, then raised their glasses again in Astrid's honor. I sat in silence, the medal heavy in my hand, meaningless under the shadow of her uniform dreams. Family photos told the same story. Astrid always front and center, polished, perfect. I was the blur on the edge of the frame, sometimes cut off entirely when the prince came back from the drugstore. Over time, the message sank in. My father never once imagined me as the one to carry the Fairmont legacy. That role had been sealed for Astrid before we were even old enough to understand what the word legacy meant. My part was written early, and it wasn't the star. I was the extra, the clipboard kid, the one outside the picture. When I finally joined the Navy, I didn't follow the course my father mapped for Astrid. She chased the deck plates and salutes. I chose the shadows. Intelligence work meant long hours in rooms that smelled of burnt coffee and recycled air, eyes glued to data streams most people would call noise. To me, it was life or death. I remember the night we called it Operation Silent Reef. A strange pattern blinked across my screen. Unfamiliar code burrowing toward the navigation system of our submarine fleet. If it succeeded, the entire squadron could have been left blind and drifting. I stayed on it for hours, tracing the intrusion, walling it off, rewriting the path until the threat collapsed into nothing. The next morning, there was no applause, no ceremony, just a single line buried in a classified report. Attempted breach detected and neutralized. When I tried to share a hint of my work at a family dinner, Astrid smirked and cut me down in front of everyone. "She does computer puzzles," she quipped, and the table burst into laughter. Even my mother chuckled, trying to hide it behind her glass. Heat rose to my face, but I kept quiet. That was the night I realized Astrid wasn't just effortlessly stealing the spotlight, she was protecting her throne. She wanted me small, forgettable. The sister no one remembered when the story of the Fairmont name was told. The missing name on today's guest list wasn't some clerical oversight. It was the newest chapter in a book they'd been writing since childhood. A book where Astrid was the hero, and I was erased. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. It didn't matter the holiday. The script never changed. Astrid would arrive in uniform, polished shoes clicking across the hardwood, her posture radiating command. She'd launch into stories about drills on the deck, nights on watch, the quirks of her division. My father would raise his glass, eyes shining, calling her the Fairmont legacy. Relatives clapped, neighbors leaned in, hungry for every detail. When my turn came, it was always a footnote, the year I was promoted to lieutenant. I cleared my throat at the table and mentioned it. My mother's smile was quick, polite. "That's nice, honey." She patted my hand, then turned immediately to Astrid. "So, tell us about your next assignment, sweetheart." The conversation snapped back like a rubber band, my words already forgotten. Another year. I tried to share about a successful intelligence exercise, how my team detected a breach no one else had spotted. Before I could explain, Astrid leaned in with a grin. "She's solving computer puzzles again." The table erupted in laughter, forks clinking against china as people shook their heads like it was the best joke of the night. My own fork tapped hard against my plate, a hollow sound echoing my place there, present but unseen. The worst cut came when my father sat with his old Navy buddies at one of those dinners. He gestured toward me with his drink and said, almost casually, "Cyrilda's smart, but she's no warrior." The words landed like a gavel striking final and absolute. Not just a dismissal, but a verdict on my entire career. That was when the truth crystallized. These weren't family meals, they were staged productions. Astrid was the star, my father her director, and the rest of us the audience. My role was set. The background character, the prop who made her shine brighter. Every toast, every laugh, every sidelong glance reinforced it. I wasn't part of the story they wanted to tell. Back in the present, standing beside my car in the San Diego parking lot, the applause from inside bled faintly through the walls. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as memories of the missions I couldn't share flooded back. Operation Night Harbor was one of them. A SEAL team had gone dark deep in hostile territory, their comms jammed, their extraction window slipping away. I sat in a dim ops center, headset digging into my ears, screens flickering chaos. I had a choice, follow orders and wait, or take the risk myself. I rerouted a satellite, pulling coverage from another theater to give them a corridor out. It wasn't clean, it wasn't authorized, but it worked. Hours later, I watched their signals converge, then lift, one by one, into the belly of an extraction bird. They lived. That was enough for me. The next day, the only acknowledgement was a dry line in a secure report. Weeks later, though, a note appeared on my desk. Handwritten, shaky. "Thank you. A teammate you saved." No signature, no details. Just a reminder that somewhere out there, men had walked away because I'd refused to stay silent. I folded that note and tucked it into my wallet. It was the only medal I truly needed. Proof that the shadows mattered, even if my family would never believe it, now. As I glanced toward the officers' club, scanning the rows of uniforms through the glass, my stomach tightened. I recognized faces, men I'd only seen in classified files, SEALs whose lives I had once carried in the weight of a keystroke. They were here tonight, to cheer for Astrid. And suddenly, the truth hit me. This ceremony wasn't just about her. This was my moment, too. My chance to step out of the frame I'd been shoved into since childhood. Either I walked away, erased again, or I walked in and claimed my place in the story. For the first time, I felt the scales tip. This wasn't Astrid's stage anymore. It was mine to take, or lose forever. The sound of applause carried faintly across the parking lot, mingled with the crisp notes of ceremonial music. I leaned against my car, the weight of my ID card heavy in my pocket, the uniform bag still untouched in the trunk. My hand trembled as I pressed the latch. The metallic click cut through the air, sharp as a blade. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, drawn eyes, clenched jaw, anger simmering beneath exhaustion. My father's words echoed like a refrain I could never silence. "She's no warrior," Astrid's voice overlapped, smug and cutting. "She does puzzles." Each phrase slammed against me with the force of years. Memories came flooding, Kansas summers in the backyard, Astrid running laps while I held a clipboard, the barbecue where my father announced her Naval Academy acceptance while I clutched a medal no one cared about, the family photos where my face was half hidden, cut out of the story before it was even told. My breath caught. If I turned the key and drove away, I knew what I'd be. The erased sister, again. That role had been carved out for me since childhood. But if I stepped inside in uniform, there would be no undoing it. I would face my family, Astrid's admirers, maybe even the men whose lives I had once held in my hands. Then the image struck me, the note folded in my wallet. Shaky handwriting, simple words. "Thank you, a teammate you saved." Whoever had written it might be sitting only yards away. Inside that hall, my fingers tightened on the edge of the trunk. For the first time, the choice felt less like a gamble and more like inevitability. The smell of burnt coffee, the flicker of green and blue lights on clustered screens, it all came rushing back. Operation Night Harbor. A SEAL team gone dark, radio silent, time bleeding out. Orders had been clear, hold position, but every minute wasted felt like betrayal. My hands moved without hesitation, rerouting satellites, leaving another theater blind to give them a corridor home. I had broken protocol, maybe even risked my career. But then the tiny blips shifted, moving toward safety, converging on the extraction bird that carried them back alive. I had gambled everything on a choice, and it paid off in lives saved. The memory snapped against the present. Laughter spilled faintly through the officers' club doors, easy and unbothered. Astrid could tell her polished stories for the rest of her life, but she had never carried the weight of men stumbling through enemy ground with death at their heels. That burden had been mine, carried in silence. I reached into the garment bag, pulling the dress whites into the sunlight. The fabric gleamed, sharp creases cutting against the air. The silver eagle insignia caught the light. Undeniable. My pulse steadied as I smoothed the jacket across my arm. The realization burned clear. Those SEALs inside didn't just owe their survival to some faceless officer. They owed it to me. If I stepped into that hall now, they would know exactly who I was. For too long, I had been content to stay invisible, the woman in the shadows, but shadows don't rewrite stories. This was the moment to step into the light. The ceremony waiting inside would not be remembered as Astrid's alone. It would be remembered as the day Cyrilda Fairmont refused to be erased. The officers' club was packed shoulder to shoulder, the air heavy with polished brass and perfumed pride. On stage, Astrid stood radiant in her new rank, her voice bright, her smile flawless. My father leaned forward in the front row, chest puffed, eyes gleaming with pride. My mother dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a napkin, glowing with the satisfaction of a dream fulfilled. Then the doors opened. I stepped inside in my dress whites. the silver eagle on my shoulders flashing beneath the lights. A few heads turned, whispers rippled along the back rows, curiosity sparking in the silence between notes of ceremonial music. Halfway down the aisle, a seal in his 40s froze, his eyes widening in recognition. In one motion, his chair scraped loudly across the floor as he shot to his feet. "Attention on deck!" His voice split the air like a gunshot. The effect was instant. The crash of chairs rang like thunder as 300 seals rose in unison, boots slamming against the hardwood in perfect cadence. The chatter, the applause, the music, all of it died at once. The weight of silence pressed over the room, broken only by the sound of hundreds standing at rigid attention. Every eye fixed on me. The master of ceremonies fumbled with his notes, his voice cracking into the microphone. "See, Captain Cyrilda Fairmont." Astrid's smile collapsed, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. My father lowered his glass, his hand trembling just enough to betray him. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over as she stared. The spotlight, so carefully arranged for Astrid, had swung off her shoulders, and without a word from me, it was mine. The hall still buzzed with the aftershock of 300 seals snapping to attention. The applause had faltered into uneasy murmurs, the kind of whispers that ripple when everyone knows something irreversible has just happened. Astrid stepped down from the stage, her heels striking sharp against the wood. She stopped in front of me, too close, her voice low but edged with desperation. "How long have you kept this a secret?" I met her stare without blinking. 15 years. Her lips parted, then closed again. For the first time in her life, Astrid had no retort. Behind her, my father rose slowly from his chair, his eyes locked onto the silver eagle on my shoulders, then drifted over the ribbons and bars across my chest. He studied them in silence, jaw tight, pride warring with disbelief. Finally, he gave a single nod. No apology, no words, just the acknowledgement I had been denied my whole life. My mother pressed a trembling hand to her chest, her voice breaking. "Tell me, what is it like to carry that kind of responsibility?" For once, she wasn't fussing over Astrid. She was asking me, and she meant it. I didn't need to explain missions or secrets. My uniform said it all. The silence that settled over us carried more weight than any speech could. And in that silence, for the first time, they could no longer deny who I was. 6 months later, I stepped back into my parents' house in Kansas. The place looked unchanged, the same careful lines of the hedges outside, the same faint smell of lemon polish on the furniture. But in the living room, something stopped me cold. The glass cabinet in the corner, once an altar to Astrid's accomplishments, was different. Her academy photos still lined the shelves. The ceremonial sword still gleamed, but right in the center, illuminated by the overhead light, rested one of my medals. Its silver glinted proudly, impossible to overlook. That night at dinner, the air felt unfamiliar. My father sat tall at the head of the table, shoulders rigid, but his tone carried no sharpness. He let me speak, never interrupting, never dismissing. When I described the pressures of leading through silence, his jaw flexed, but he stayed quiet, absorbing every word. My mother leaned toward me, her questions careful and deliberate. How decisions weighed on me, how I balanced responsibility when lives depended on seconds. Her eyes held none of the old pity, none of the glossed-over dismissal. Instead, they carried a respect that startled me. Across the table, Astrid twisted her napkin between her fingers. Her face, usually so sure of itself, looked strangely uncertain. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, stripped of its edge. "Turns out I could never keep up." There was no bitterness in it, no rivalry, just truth, raw and simple. She wasn't conceding defeat. She was admitting what she had always feared, that my path had been one she could never follow. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. A small smile pulled at my lips, not from victory, but from release. For the first time, the room didn't feel like a stage where I was a prop in Astrid's performance. It felt like a table where I belonged. Later, driving away under the Kansas night sky. The headlights carved steady beams into the dark. The road stretched ahead, quiet and open. I knew then I was no longer the blurred figure at the edge of the frame. The name scratched off the list. The sister erased. That chapter was closed. This time, I was written into the story, unshakable, unerasable, and no one, not Astrid, not even my father, could take that from me again.